Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. It always amazes me that people seem fairly convinced that their problem is very tactical. It's very, it's LinkedIn, or it's this audience, or it's my content, or it's some very tactical thing that can be fixed if I just knew how to hack the algorithm, or, crop my post this way, or use this sales navigator feature, or whatever. And they come to us looking for this, right? Like they come to us looking for the tip or the hack. And, nobody really seems very satisfied with the answer that it's not a tactical problem. It's a strategic problem. Why is that?
Why do they believe it's a tactical problem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to see that it's really a strategic problem?
Well, I would say because as human beings, we, for some terrible evolutionary reason, look for the easy answer, right? This notion of the magic bullet, this idea that I can make a change. And in this case in particular, I can make some kind of an adjustment to my marketing that really doesn't have a lot to do with me, right? This isn't about me needing to find something out about my market or my offer or anything else. If I can just, beat the algorithm or learn the hack, I think there's two things. One is it feels easier, and the other, it feels less personal. It's less scary, and it's less easily internalized. If it's just a hack, if it's just a trick, someone else can be responsible for giving me that answer. If it is truly the strategy, then I have some work to do, and that is challenging.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So I think it's human nature to externalize blame, right? When you can't get something to work, some are better than others, right? But it is, I think, fundamentally human nature to look for a scapegoat, look for someone to blame, look for something external to you, because, who the heck wants to confront their own inadequacies? Some do this better than others, but it's uncomfortable at best, right? So where do you point the finger? Now I always find it comical when we talk to somebody who is, let's say, in a niche or in an industry that we know really well, and we have countless examples of these folks doing well on LinkedIn. Okay. And then somebody comes and says, well, LinkedIn doesn't work. Oh, really? Because we have piles of data that would indicate the opposite. So is it that LinkedIn doesn't work, or you couldn't figure it out? But it's a lot easier to say, it's that platform, it's a cesspool, it's a this, it's a that, it doesn't work, nobody's there. Yeah, that's a whole lot easier than to own, you know what? Clearly some folks are getting results on this platform. Maybe there's something flawed in my approach or my strategy. That's harder, that's more introspective, that's more uncomfortable than just saying, yeah, the thing doesn't work. And the place where I see this show up the most, to be candid, is, let's use this. This is an example, but it's probably a telling example. It's not hard for us to convince people that they need to be on LinkedIn, or they need to have a presence, or they need to leverage the platform to engage their target market and build relationships. Like, that's not hard to argue. People get it. They're there, right? Prospects are there, clients are there. And they're very comfortable having a conversation around, the nuts and bolts of that. Here's how you do outreach. Here's how you create content. Here's how you, that's a comfortable conversation. But the moment you direct the conversation towards, yeah, but what about your message? Who's your target market? And why should they choose you? Like, how strong is your positioning? It's like pulling teeth.
Well, and it's interesting to watch it play out when people are working with us, because even if they believe, and I think we do a pretty good job of explaining that this isn't the case, but sometimes they'll get into our environment and they'll still believe that's the thing they're going to do, right? They're immediately going to go and start hacking the system, right? And figuring LinkedIn out, whatever that means. And we don't let that happen, right? We take them through a very intense exercise where they do a lot of introspection, and more importantly, where they do a lot of research, right? Where they go out and they talk to the people that they want to work with, which is sometimes just an earth-shattering exercise that they go through. And that is almost always, for almost everybody, by far the most difficult thing that they do with us, and sometimes the most difficult thing that they do in their business. And as with most things, the most difficult thing always often the most valuable. But the amount of support and the amount of encouragement and the amount of structure that we build around that to help people through it is very necessary, because it's difficult. But if there's nothing else that you do in this world when you are, taking your business out to the market, it is the thing that needs to be done.
Well, and it's very convenient, right? So people like to hide behind a whole bunch of busy work. People like to hide behind, well, I have to create all this content for LinkedIn, and I've got to work on my profile, and I've got to change my banner image. They'd like to hide behind those things because, and this isn't always the case, but in a lot of cases, they're petrified of getting on the phone with a prospect and making an offer. And so, really convenient way to avoid that fear is to drown yourself in busy work and then blame the platform when the platform doesn't deliver the results that you actually fundamentally don't want. Maybe there's an interesting conversation to be had here. We tell folks inside 90-day pipeline, like when they enroll with us, like the goal is you have, a whole heap of qualified prospects who want to do business with you. You have a waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking to new prospects, every week. You're consistently bringing in new opportunities. You're having conversations. You're making offers. You're closing deals. And actually, deep down, there's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable with that whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
So they drown themselves in the busy work. They focus on hacking the LinkedIn algorithm and using the right hashtags instead of talking to people who can write checks with their name on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also the arm's length work, right? Like, yes, you're doing it, but the results of it's kind of happen out there, right? They happen out in a space where you can decide to what degree you take them on board. Very different than talking to a prospect. And what I think is actually a brilliant result of having that conversation, but which I also understand is, feels in the moment like a terrible result, is finding out that they don't want the thing that you are presenting, right? Or they don't want it in that way, or they have a different need. And I think it's really easy externally, like when you talk to someone about somebody else's business, they can absolutely see that that's important information to get, right? They can see that that is critical learning. They completely understand the logic behind it. But to your point, it's when I actually need to do it that the fear kicks in. And then I will do almost anything else to avoid that happening.
Yeah. And again, it's human nature to dislike being wrong. Mm-hmm. We fight like hell to prove that we're right. And, often what happens inside our program is people find out they were wrong. Mm-hmm. Here's a very common scenario. I come in with a hypothesis. I believe the market wants this thing. And then, in our program, we don't take that as a given. We force you as the very first step to go to the market and conduct what are called customer listening conversations. These are These are market research conversations, interview based, that are strictly designed to gather intelligence and insight from the market to validate whether the market actually does want the thing that you're selling. And if they do, then for you to reposition that conversation and make them an offer and ultimately close a deal. And until you do that, you have no business going hog wild on LinkedIn
Mhm.
and creating a bunch of content and doing a bunch of outreach and trying to get a bunch of conversations going because you haven't validated the premise of your business. Now, if you're obviously an established business, this is a different story, right?
Mhm.
But if you're selling a new offer, right, or it's a new business, either way, until you get some really hard validation from the market that they want the thing you're selling, and hard validation is a paying client or something very close to a paying client, the busy work will, not get you anywhere.
And it's fascinating to watch often, not always, but how stuck in their belief we can get around what we think we know that the prospect wants, right? We are so, 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 so sure that we know that people fight this notion of asking, right? Oh, I already know. We had this happened on one of our calls earlier this week, where the client that we were working with said, "Well, I don't need to go through all of this. I don't need to have those conversations because I already know what my client wants." And the question they were asked was, "Okay, then, like, are you happy with the revenue that you're generating? Are you happy with the number of clients that you have? Are you happy with your pipeline?" And there was silence, and there was further conversation. And now they're going out to have those conversations because there was this essential mismatch between, being so sure that they knew, but also recognizing that everything they were doing that was based on that premise wasn't getting them where they wanted to go.
So if you really truly know what your market wants and needs, and you understand the language that they use to communicate that, and you know exactly what to communicate to them to get their attention, you would know,
Yes.
because your LinkedIn profile would be converting, your outreach messages would get responses, your live workshops would be getting attendance, you'd be getting people onto discovery calls, you'd be making offers, you'd be closing deals. This thing would work like clockwork. And the telltale sign that you don't know is when that's not working.
Mhm.
Either you don't know what they want or you're not able to communicate it back to them. One or the other.
And there's some faulty thinking around this, I believe, as well, where folks often believe that they are going to land that all immediately in one fell swoop. And to the extent that we've actually just added in to the very beginning of our program a whole lesson slash conversation on iterating. It has nothing to do with messaging. It has nothing to do with LinkedIn. It has nothing to do with, who's your client. It's about resetting your mindset and really approaching this whole thing like a scientist. Scientists don't go into experiments, being sure they know they're good scientists, don't go into experiments being sure they know the result and then, trying to force the experiment to deliver what they were looking for. Good scientists have a hypothesis, right? They think they know what might be the case and then they test it. And that is exactly the approach that needs to happen here because you're not going to know it on your own without having the conversations. You're also not going to know it forever, right? You're going to figure out messaging and all of the stuff around it that works today, and then things are going to shift and change for you, for the folks in your market, and you're going to have to make adjustments. And so this idea of talking to your client, this radical idea for some people, um, isn't just something that you do once. This is part of an ongoing investigation that ensures that you are continually optimizing. You are continually making adjustments. You are continually moving closer and closer towards the prospects that you want to attract at that moment.
There was a big movement in this like lean startup community around this idea of doing customer development before, or at the very least alongside, product development. And the mantra was, get out of the building. And the problem that was prevalent before the lean startup movement really kind of took shape was, entrepreneurs were going out and starting companies and building products and like writing lines and lines and lines of code for these software products without actually doing any real market validation, apart from maybe you're reading a Gartner research report or two, right? That's not actual market validation. They didn't get customers first. They just assumed that they knew what the market wanted, then built it, and in some cases spent tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, in the case of larger companies, maybe millions of dollars, building a product only to find out it's not what the market wanted.
Mhm.
And that's kind of an obvious mistake, right? We can call it, why spend money on coders before you have customers and you don't know what they actually want? Doesn't make any sense, right? And yet people do this in consulting and professional services all the time. Yeah, I get it. You're not going to spend, tens of thousands of dollars on coders. It's a little bit different, but the same like business logic applies, right? Why build an offer, finalize an offer, build a solution, what we call a results mechanism, just based on what you think is true, when you are fundamentally not the client? I mean, even the clients that we have who were in their buyer's roles previously, let's say you're selling into CMOs and you were a CMO, even then you have to acknowledge that you are no longer a CMO, and therefore there's an empathy gap.
Mhm.
And even if you were a CMO yesterday, you were one CMO and you're selling to thousands, and they're not all like you, and their company dynamics are not all the same, and their culture is not all the same, and their needs they're different than you. So you have to, I think, have the humility to acknowledge that you're not the market,
Mhm.
and the market may feel differently about things than you do, and that's okay. That doesn't necessarily, you know, tarnish or diminish your expertise. It's just an acknowledgement that your experience is not the universal experience, and there are other perspectives out there that you necessarily need to understand in order to effectively market.
Yeah, and you touched on this before, but I think it's important to highlight it. It also isn't necessarily that what you are delivering is, incorrect or needs to be adjusted. We put too little emphasis. We don't. We put a lot of emphasis, but often people put too little emphasis on simply figuring out what the communication around that looks like. So you can deliver the exact same solution and talk about it, I don't know how many different, multiple different ways, countless different ways. And it's really just understanding language, right? It's understanding, to your point, how people feel. It's understanding how the conversations around that solution need to happen so that they're compelling to the people that you want them to be compelling to. And so it can also be helpful to divide those two things up, right? Validating the actual guts of the thing that you're bringing out into the world, the solution, and then validating the offer in terms of just how do we talk about it? How do people think about it? Do they think about it? How much do they think about it, right? How much does or doesn't it keep them awake at night? Those are the things that are critical. And so there is, humility required around what it is that you do. And even more broadly, or maybe more importantly, in the context of the conversation we're having, just really understanding how people are receiving it.
I had this conversation yesterday with a consultant who really smart, really accomplished in the leadership development space, and wants to be doing a certain type of leadership development work, and has done a lot of work on LinkedIn, a lot of technical stuff, and has nothing to show for it. And the thing she said to me was, I know there's a need for this in the market.
Mhm.
I said, well, how do you know? And she says, well, here's the research, and here are the reports, and here's what the studies have found, and here's what, this particular, think tank said, right? A lot of just like general, proof that there is this particular issue in businesses at large. And I go, yeah, I don't doubt that there's a need, but how do you know the market that you want to work with is willing to pay money to you to solve and address the need. Because lots of problems exist. I mean, our business, there's lots of problems. Most of them I'm not willing to spend money on solving right now. Maybe in the future, yeah, right? But at any given point in time in any business, there's a small handful of problems that are worthy of attention, and everything else gets ignored. So it's one thing for there to be a need. It's another thing for you to understand, where does that need show up in organizations, and in what kind of organizations does it become an urgent need, one that's worthy of, attention and resource, and how do I communicate to them that I have a solution to that urgent need? These are all things that we gather from the, what we call customer listening, but from any kind of market research exercise.
Yeah, and saying, market research exercise makes it sound dramatic and kind of huge. And I would say it's dramatic in the effects that it has. It does not have to be terribly dramatic in terms of how it's carried out. What we're really talking about is connecting with a reasonable sample size of the right people. And in 3 or 4 or 5 conversations, it is astounding how much useful information that can truly change your approach can be gathered.
I think the key there is when those conversations are strictly focused on market research.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through this. We eat our own dog food. We did this. We hired a consultant. We designed a whole customer listening market research process. We had me go out and do the interviews. And I said, guys, come on. I've talked to thousands of consultants. I've built this company. We've graduated almost 900. I've personally talked to easily 10,000 consultants. What am I going to learn from your little interviews? Right. But the game changer was, I've had lots of conversations with consultants, both in the sales process and in the program, but those were either sales conversations or coaching conversations. And when you have a market research conversation that's strictly designed to extract insights and intelligence, not to convince or persuade or coach or guide, it's a completely different conversation. So I ended up having, I think, 5. And we're still benefiting from the data that was gathered from those 5 conversations, because I was able to ask questions and get insight that I just would not get in any other type of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.